Hello, and welcome to the Tales from Wales podcast. Hello to anyone watching at home. If you want to get involved with the show, feel free to comment and get in touch with myself, Steffan, or our guests. This week, Steffan and I are joined by Horatio Clare. Horatio, how are we?
I'm very well, thank you, Drew. It's a lovely day in exile in the north of England. And day, whatever it is, 204 of lockdown. Hugely relieved to be at least, virtually with you in Wales.
Yeah, I think it's March the 93rd now, or something like that. Isn't it? I think that's sort of the current date. But how have you been holding up? How have you been holding up in this period? Has it really sort of changed how you go about your daily routine anyway, or is it pretty much the same for yourself?
It's been good for the writing. No distractions, and we live on the edge of a little town called Hebden Bridge in the Pennines, which is beautiful. So we're very blessed with woods and streams, and I've got a little boy, so I spend a lot of time in woods and streams. My teaching at Manchester went online, which was actually good in that I hate commuting to Manchester. I kind of hate Manchester. And my students, instead of sitting around in bars agonizing about writing, actually did brilliant work. So that was fine. But it's become really, I do feel a bit itchy now. When they announced yesterday that, or whenever it was, that Wales is going to reopen on the 6th of July, I was just so relieved because I really miss it and I miss my mum. So I'll be back there. I'll be crossing the border at midnight is the idea.
It sounds very, very covert, that does. As if you're going to be sort of camouflaged up and sneaking over the border illicitly.
Well, people have been, and I do love the border.
Well, you said mum is still in Wales. Is that sort of? Could you explain your sort of links to Wales and your attachments to Wales?
Yeah, so before I was born, my parents had this idea that they would get they would be posh and they would buy a country house. But then mistakenly, in a way, they bought a 73-acre sheep farm up a hill in the Black Mountains. And my mum fell in love with sheep farming and kind of out of love with my dad. So by the time I was sort of they'd more or less split. They were kind of hanging together, but they ended up splitting. Dad went back to London. He was a journalist. And my brother and I, grew up with my mum on this farm near Cwmdu, near Crick Howell. And I went to school first at Cwmdu School and then at Llangattock. And so it was very odd because I spoke as I do now and I didn't print it on my parents. So I was always teased for being posh or English. I remember they'd say, "You are posh." And I went home and said to my mum, "They're calling me posh, mum." And my mum, who's a delightful snob, said, "Well, you are, darling." And it was the greatest of my childhood. But it took me a while. In fact, it was Cardiff Arms Park. We went to watch under-21s, and I really wanted the Welsh to win. So that was the first hint. And then it took me ages to figure out where I was from. And then I realized I was from a valley, which happens to be in Wales. Therefore, I'm Welsh. And I went to school in England briefly, and then back in Wales, and then backwards and forwards ever since, really. So this is my home.
What was quite nice then as well is that you mentioned the Arms Park and under-21s. You didn't reference any sport at all, but everyone knows exactly what sport you're talking about because you're doing it. And it couldn't possibly be anything else.
No.
You said that Dad's a journalist. Like, would you just, like, if you sort of pop your name in Google, like I often do with our guests, you come up as like writer, author, journalist. How do you sort of see yourself with? How do you classify yourself?
Yeah, I mean, it's you can't. My agent said to me when I was going to leave my job at the BBC, she said there are about 12 writers in Britain who make a living out of writing books. You're probably not one of them. So ever since then, I've taught and done newspaper journalism and magazine journalism and broadcasting. So it's a mix. Yeah, I'm the three of them, and I love journalism. It's a trade I'm honoured to be in, and as a writer, it's mostly non-fiction. I've written children's books, but really, I tend not to make it up. So my books are somewhere between kind of what they used to call life writing and travel writing and long-form journalism, really. So yeah, it's a lovely mixture of arts, and I try and teach it because although it's hard to teach people to write successful books, you can teach anyone the rudiments of writing well, and certainly journalism is a craft you can teach. So that's what I do at Manchester.
Would you say it's like a case of taking a passion into a career path for you?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I knew I wasn't going to be a sheep farmer. That was my one decision. we've done kind of reneging on now. But I didn't really have any other models for employment except I wanted to be a writer. I remember reading Alistair MacLean when I was very young and thinking, this guy spends half his time writing and the other half of the time traveling. I want to do that. I was about 10 when I kind of committed to writing.
Perhaps an avoidance tactic of the sheep instead of maybe a way of getting out to sheep farming.
Yeah.
But we met very briefly doing a little bit for Radio Wales, I think, about maybe 18 months ago, something like that. And I think at the time you were just doing a bit of promo for your book, The Light in the Dark. And prior to that, I was never aware of seasonal affective disorder or what that is. Do you think that sort of... how does that sort of affected you living in like rural Wales? Is it more of a thing outside of cities and towns?
Well, interesting actually. I never really suffered that badly in Wales, mostly because of the sheep. If you're going out every day farming, it's fine. You're too busy, and then you're too relieved and tired when you get back in, and you just want to watch a club rugby on S4C, and you're made. You can get through entire winters like that. But then in the north of England, I found it very difficult because I'm lazy, and I didn't do what northern people do, which is put on lycra or waterproofs and get out and face it. I was hunched up in an attic reading and writing books. And it just became ridiculous. I would start to dread it, and then it would come, and then kind of these endless black rains and commuting, and it piles up. And then I realized when I started researching the book, it is actually it's the easiest form of depression to tackle, because it basically is a lack of light and a lack of vitamin D and a lack of exercise and a lack of oily fish. And you can put all that stuff right. Unusually in the mental health sphere, you can put it right without taking bloody awful pills. So that's what it became about, was an attempt to look at winter, as a thing of beauty, and to look at my own area up here, where I feel very foreign, as a travel writer would, to try and see it fresh. And The Light in the Dark was basically a winter journal, which came out of that.
Do you think there's been any sort of parallels with seasonal affective disorder with like this lockdown period now? Because like recently, I feel like I've almost reached a point of lockdown fatigue, and I'm sort of craving normality a little bit. Do you think it runs a few parallels there?
Yeah, I think we would have been in terrible trouble as a nation if this had happened over the winter. I can't imagine how awful that would have been. But it does lift everyone's spirits. Just a sunny day. It's bound to. I'm sure it goes right back to our basic, biology and hunter-gatherer roots. On a fine day, you can go out and get eat. Whereas when it's miserable, everything hides, including us. And I think any strategy that gets you through is viable. If you want to stay in bed, then do, but it doesn't make it better. The conversation about mental health has been fascinating. Suddenly, people who would never have talked about it before, it's part of the normal conversation. Our mental health, we have rights and needs in the area of that. In fact, when I saw you, when we met, I was promoting that book and a book about Bach at the same time. And I was on a rising manic high, which would just get worse and worse until I was banged up in the following January in a mental hospital in Wakefield. So that was a kind of change, a complete change of life. And I was aware as it was happening that I was, it was incredibly rich. I was incredibly lucky in a way as a writer, because although quite a lot of writers do see the insides of mental homes, not all of us write about them. So that's what I've been doing recently. I've just finished a book about that.
Do you find, like, with the sort of ups and downs and different periods of mental health, it feeds into your writing a little bit and helps you manage it maybe?
It does a bit, yeah. I mean, that's the horrible danger of. There's a brilliant book by Jay Griffiths called Tristomania, which is about why the high is so compulsive and addictive and amazing, why you don't want to get rid of it. And with me, it sparks very simply. I'm affected by cannabis. If I smoke dope, then I don't go out until I finished it. Then I go out for more, and then I start staying up all night, and then it all goes to pot really quickly. So that was part of it for me. But yeah, I think we're on a moment of extraordinary change in the way mental health is regarded. Out recently about how we need nature, how we need exercise, how we need each other, how we need conversation, how we don't need pills. A lot of the time, the treatment for mental health is scandalous. People get put on stuff that makes them worse in the long term, and all the stats show that. So fascinating moment of transformation, in fact, in our relationship to our minds.
Steph?
Kudos to you on the mental health. I've suffered from depression. I've been off antidepressants now since September last year, and it's the best thing that's ever happened to me. I'm taking CBD capsules. I think they're working really well. So I think, I think you're doing a great thing there. I think we're all doing a great thing, and I think the whole country is going to have a mental health problem by the end of this, and I think we'll all need to go into it at the same time and come out of it at the same time. I think.
That's right.
And I was going on to my question. I find it very interesting that you were born in London and you came and were raised in Wales. I think that's the best way to be raised, I believe, in my opinion. But do you think that you're? Yeah, it's the best place. I mean, you were saying just now, like, you're that's a classic Welsh love story that, your mum moves to a hill farm and falls in love with a sheep and doesn't need a man anymore. That's ideal. But that's going to stay with me. But I would say my question would be, if you hadn't moved to Wales, do you think that your point of view or vision when it comes to your writing would be similar, or it would be different? Do you think?
It would be huge. I don't know if I'd even have made it in to that because my first book was a story of growing up on that mountain, and it was saturated, as my childhood was, in the beauty and also, of course, the savagery of the natural world and books, because we didn't have TV because there was a mountain in the way of the TV signal. So it made me. Absolutely, it did, and that childhood does. I think you can probably make anybody a writer if you give them enough books when they're kids and they take to it. And it was very imaginative childhood. So we were unable to watch Airwolf or the A-Team except when we were on late houses after school, and then we would just ignore them and stare at their TVs. But definitely, Wales taught me what it is to look at nature and what it is to feel what it can give you and to see something of its stories and its rhythms. And that and Radio 4, probably the constant, the voices. And my mother was a great talker, and I just absorbed that. So when it came to writing a first book, I took it down like dictation. And if you go to like Dylan Thomas's boathouse in Larne, you can see he's just sitting there taking it straight from life. And the same, of course, with Under Milk Wood, So yes, it definitely makes writers. It's not an accident that the Celtic fringe is like Ireland and Wales produce such extraordinary literature. And in Wales, we've been particularly blessed with support from the Welsh government and what was Academy and then became Literature Wales. We've had a golden generation of writing, and that's partly produced willfully by the culture itself, which values it. And we've just been extraordinarily lucky in that regard. I was adopted by the Welsh literary establishment when my first book came out and told I was a Welsh writer. And that's been the making of me.
Perhaps that's a relationship that worked both ways, maybe. So perhaps they wanted you on board as much as you wanted to be.
Well, they were very kind.
You said about like exposure, and I think is sort of a balancing act between sort of perhaps ability as a writer and like experiences you have and practice and exposure to things like you said about your mum being a talker and the ability to be in these places. If anyone wants to be a writer, or that sort of is an ambition of theirs, do you think it's about repetition and practice as much as ability?
I think it's 90% will. Getting into it, publishing is something you want to do, and I've seen it in courses I've taught, adult courses, where you get to the end of the week and you've got 90% of them have got a really good idea, they've got a really good proposal. All they've got to do now is go away and write it, and you've talked about how that might be done, and then within the next couple of weeks you get emails saying, actually, you know what, I think I might do it differently, or I don't really like it anymore, or don't believe in it, and they just count themselves out of the game. So I think talent plays a role, but it's hugely about will. It's about wanting something badly enough. And you're right about experiences. I'm not, the kind of writer like Zadie Smith who can just sit down and make it up to the extent that any of us do. I need to live it first on the whole. So then I write that up.
I find it draws a parallel, like comedy writing and stand-up writing, which is sort of, what me and Steffan attempt to do at least. But I find there's nothing worse than a blank page. A blank page is the most daunting thing that you can sort of be faced with when you're trying to be creative. And I think real life feeds into, there's nothing more amusing, nothing more interesting than real life, really. And I find that really feeds into my writing, and I base things on, stuff that happens to me and that sort of thing. But like going back to when I sort of first met you on Radio Wales, Dan Thomas was another comedian, was on the show, and when you came on, he became really excited when you sort of came in and said hello and entered the studio. And I said, what's the matter? He said, he's an author. He read this fantastic book about a ship. And I was like, all right, okay. He recommended Down to the Sea and Ships to me. And I've been reading that. And I found it fascinating, like, sort of, first of all, like, why you would decide to stow away on a ship for months and write about it. And where that idea was coming from, It's such a sort of ballsy move as well, because, like, where did the idea come from, first of all?
I've always loved ships. Went to school at Atlantic College for a while on the Bristol Channel and used to watch them. Read a lot of maritime writing. Was really into Conrad and sailing and all those things. Did lifeboats for a little while when I was very young. But it's two things. It's just a cracking idea, container shipping. Nobody's writing about it, and then it's getting the permission to do it. And after that, it was a massive open goal. You couldn't go wrong. Here's this extraordinary world packed with stories and people who are stuck on a ship with nothing to do, apart from their incredibly hard work, but to talk about it except tell you them. So it was easy once I'd done, that, had the idea. And that was just, I read Moby Dick and I was in Verona, we were living there, and I had this idea, he says, when my humours get the upper half of me and it's this dank November in my soul, and I have difficulty not joining every funeral cortege that passes and knocking strangers' hats off in the street, I count it high time to go to sea. And I was in exactly that mood. And I thought, stop there. Oh, that's it. And so I emailed Maersk and off we went. And it was the most amazing experience. And that's part of it. This kind of writing that I do, the lovely thing is if you're lucky enough to get the access, then you can spend your time finding out stories firsthand. And then all you've got to do is take them down. And my notes for that are continual longhand with no crossings out, because I'm just writing it down as it's happening. So that's it, really. Non-fiction writing, when you break it down to that level, is pretty straightforward. Yeah, it was marvelous, and really moving and infuriating. The way that capitalism works, the way that supply chains work. Yeah. Way we treat laborers, what we now call essential workers or recognize as such, scandal after scandal. And I am a political writer, and that it gave me a lot of material.
Well, like my only experience of a shipping boat like that is your book and the film Captain Phillips with Tom Hanks. Is very limited, and I thought it was a really interesting line in the book where you said that it's something that it's a part of the world that people are completely unaware of, but yet it keeps the world we know moving. And I found that a fascinating sort of explanation or metaphor for it, really. Did you feel a bit? Did the ship welcome you on board, though? And did you feel part of the crew, or did you feel a little bit like intrusive in some ways?
Yeah, no, they're very sweet, but they look at you like you're an alien. In fact, my captain on the first trip used to introduce me, journalist, like I was an alien that he'd just been asked to transport, and they're like, "What are you? Who are you? What do you want?" And I speak this kind of English, and they speak seafaring English, because English is language of the seas. But Filipino can talk to an Indian, can talk to a Romanian in their version of it. But they often couldn't understand what on earth I was talking about either. So when we got through all that, I started writing blog posts and putting them up in the lift, because everyone used the lift. And then they were like, so you want to tell our stories? Okay. Yeah. And then we were off, except for one kid who kept hiding from me because he'd had his computer seized by customs at Felixstowe because it had some terrible porn on it. And so for 2 months, he led me all around the ship. It was great, of course, and they were very forthcoming. And Maersk were very good. They've changed. I mean, they've tightened up because it's an unregulated, unobserved environment. So they've got nothing really to gain by publicizing it, although they're the industry leader. And their press office has become more cautious. But I think we're pleased with the book because it put them in the right light, which is, they're doing a good job in an appalling industry in many ways.
So, like, best of a bad bunch, perhaps, is it?
Well, yes, I think that's probably true.
Yeah.
True. It all depends on it.
It's interesting as well, like you said, the captain introduced you as just journalist, like almost as if that's some sort of slur, being a journalist.
Yeah.
Was it sort of obviously high points and low points, but is there anything you found difficult being on the ship for that period of time, knowing you also had a job to try and do?
It was odd not being exposed to the same regime of work that they were. It made me work very hard. You feel spectacularly useless. They work 6 hours on, 6 hours off, round the clock can be 13 months at a stretch, and it's absolutely grueling. One of them said very proudly to me, "This is a man's job," and he wasn't saying that in slighting women. He was just saying that is what it is for us. And very, very few women at sea. That companies have made efforts, and there used to be more, to take women to sea or to put them in position. And you do get there are famous and adept captains and senior officers, but it's overwhelmingly male, and it's overwhelmingly about taking loneliness on, and accepting that your family won't see you, and you'll miss all the birthdays and you'll miss everything, but you'll send the money home. So it's heroic in that regard. And they were fascinating in that they threw a very interesting light on our agenda. They weren't macho. There was nobody to show off to. They were very strong with themselves. They were very sympathetic. They were gently very sensitive to each other's moods and needs. It was wonderfully heartening in that way. I mean, I'm fascinated by men are one of my subjects, perhaps because my parents split, so I didn't see enough of my dad. And it's an amazing place to see them, because the sea reveals character very quickly. If you can't handle it, or if you've got troubles of your own, then they'll be revealed very quickly. And then it's a question of whether your crew, your workmates can help you, or whether it all goes to hell. And the captains and the senior officers, in fact, right down to the very junior rates, I just found this remarkable, selfless, industrious body of people.
Steph?
I mean, the question I've got is, I heard that there was karaoke on one of the ships. I mean, what must it be like to watch, a crew of alpha males sing love songs at each other with no women there,
Well, they do away with the kind of alpha thing, because you are your role. So the captain is the alpha, and that's how it breaks down, and the chief engineer. And so then nobody gets anywhere with throwing weight around. There was one scene in Captain Phillips where the crew are objecting to the captain's plans, and I couldn't see that quite. My captain was, they're absolutely ruthless about their men's safety, about their crew's safety. It's all about that. The good ones, anyway. And then the karaoke, so Filipino seafarers, who about at least a third of the maritime workforce, have a union negotiated right to a karaoke machine if there's more than a certain number of them on a ship. And the real part of the union don't have a great deal of power, but they've got that sus. So it's serious business. And they have, in my view, the worst taste on earth. So it's all kind of lovers elevator rock. And they used to stand it. And they would tease me about my hopeless taste. And then you don't get that many chances to do it, but we were anchored off Suez, and they started doing it, and it was deadly serious. And the whole ship was deserted except for the lounge where they were up to it. And there were just all these pairs of shoes outside the door, and they were getting down to it. And it was really touching, because they were singing about lovers far away. It was beautiful.
Have you got a karaoke song of choice yourself?
No, I don't do karaoke. Okay, so that's the other thing about growing up in Wales as me, is that my teacher would come along the line of us singing, and she'd listen to me, and she'd actually wince, and then she'd go on to the next bit. So I was always made to be Herod in the school play. Never really allowed to sing.
Xenophobia.
It's a wonderful thing, isn't it? Yeah.
Steph, was you going to ask about the spooky sea?
Oh yeah. This is the question I want to ask you. I love all the things that are like supernatural, that kind of stuff, and you do hear those stories of how spooky the sea can be, like mainly at night. I mean, they hear voices and stuff, and famously there's a photograph of the SS Waterdown where you can see ghostly faces in the sea and stuff. Did you notice or see anything like that while you were out there?
they're intensely eerie environments. So when you approach a ship, she's massive, just incomprehensibly big, and they roar all the time because the generators are running, the engines are running, and they smell of diesel, hot metal, and institutional cooking, and not unlike a prison in that kind of smell. And then of men, and you get on board, and you can feel the atmosphere the minute you board. If it's an unhappy ship, you know it, because it's partly their steel structures, but also there's something about the way the sea seems to magnify all the eerie and the inexplicable. And then you ask them about their stories, and they've all got them. And they're very superstitious indeed. Even the most rational sailor won't whistle. On some ships, they just don't whistle because it brings storms. No steel feet on the deck, no feet on the steel deck. You have to wear shoes. Never kill a bird. Don't sit on a capstan or a sailor drowns. There are loads of them. And they told me extraordinary stories about stuff that they'd seen and things that they'd heard. And if anyone dies on a ship, then they have to have a sea priest aboard to perform a service of blessing before they'll happily sail on it again. And some of them were truly frightening. When there was this wonderful first mate, John, second mate, he was a Geordie, and he was a kind of shambling sea dog. He's a wonderful guy and full of stories, most of them horrendous. And he would tell them with enormous relish, with his eyes fixed on you to make sure you were really getting it. And there's one moored at Hunstanton off the coast of Scotland. And it sounds like the bleakest place, outside Siberia. And he decides to get his mum on board, and she's come all the way up to join him. And so they get onto this ship, and she won't go on board, and he has to really fight to get her on board. And finally, she gets on, and then she goes to his cabin, and she won't leave his cabin. And the captain says, "Would you like a tour?" And she says, "No." And "Would you like to stay overnight?" She says, "No." And finally, John takes her off the ship, and he says, "What was that about, Ma?" And she says, "Something terrible happened on that ship." And he says, "I knew that people had been stabbed to death on it, but she can't have known. It wasn't on the internet. It wasn't anywhere." And he said, "How do you know, Mum?" And she said, "I could see them." That put willies up me. Our most spooky nights were like when we were out in the North Atlantic, really quite bad weather, and it was kind of dashing and wild, and you just got this feeling of madness beyond the bridge, really. And the dark of the sea, and you're going over mass graveyards, of course, with the North Atlantic convoy. So there's wreck after wreck below you, and there are records of the sea being covered in lights like fireflies from all the life jackets of torpedoed sailors, and it was ferocious, and you could sense it all. It was all there. They say the sea has no memory, but then if you read the stories, it becomes not just kind of palpable memory, but sensible memory, in that it appears to be right there.
Did you experience any sort of strange or sort of unusual things during your period? Because obviously you're on the ship for multiple months, and perhaps there is an element of your mind or your brain playing some tricks on you here and there in that sense. But did anything sort of eerie or spooky happen to you specifically?
Walking around the ship itself, particularly at night, was very spooky because all the containers make noises, and the ship groans and roars, and things batter and kind of crash about. So it's like you've got ghosts aboard anyway. And then there are really odd smells. You get prickled. That turned out to be cow heads in brine. We were transporting all these severed cow heads, and they stank. So that was odd. But no, and one of them, the oldest one I was on, she had her own internal soundtrack, which was like a whistling sort of moaning sound in the stairwells, and she had a kind of internal gale effect all the time, and you could feel the history of her. In fact, she burned and ended up being scrapped. But no, I didn't see anything. Unfortunately, I certainly sensed it.
Like, to be honest, like the way you just sort of quite casually said you were transporting severed cow heads shows that there's quite a weird and wonderful range of cargo on a ship like that. Would you say Cowheads is up there with the weirdest and
I would say so. It took me months to get them to release the manifest because they don't tell the seafarers what they're carrying except for the explosive stuff that needs to be kept cold. worried that they'll about theft and stuff, and they just don't see the need. So it took me ages to get the manifests, and then it turned out, the things that you would imagine, like tons of explosives and fireworks and shoe polish and forks and computers and spacecraft and all that kind of thing. And then these severed cow heads, which were going from Algeciras, I think, to Qatar or somewhere, or Malaysia, and they absolutely reeked. As it got hotter and hotter, they just stank. And there's some sort of delicacy, but they made this rather ghastly soup which sloshed all over the decks. And you walked. So yeah, it was really weird. And then you realize you're carrying milk from Argentina, which is destined for Nova Scotia. And this isn't because they haven't got, cows in Canada. It's just because the market's insane. And then you realize that there's no controlling mind, that capitalism, because of the freight rates being so low, it made sense to raise your chickens in Denmark, take them to China to be filleted, and then bring them back to Denmark to sell them. And it's just bizarre. And of course, it's environmentally incredibly costly. It's the 7th most polluting country in the world is shipping. But the companies are trying. They don't want to do that any more than anybody else does. But as they say, we enable globalization because we are it. We're answering a demand. It may be that this business will change the way we think about that somewhat, but I don't see it changing hugely. Bigger and more fuel-efficient ships is where it's going at the moment. Yeah.
But if anyone, is interested in what you say, and down to the sea and ships, I'd recommend that to anyone. I'm on chapter 6 at the moment, so don't give away the ending. No spoilers, please. You've written a book about a sort of retelling of Welsh legends as well. Is it myths and legends, something that is quite appealing to you?
Yeah, I did. Because you grow up on them, don't you? Like Gelert and stuff, Yeah. In fact, I was in Corwen and I got talking to somebody. I was having a cigarette outside a restaurant, and he told me a version of Gelert in which the dog survives.
A nicer version.
Really?
Yeah. But, so yes, of course, you definitely grow up with them, and rewriting them was easy and fun. Really, it was wonderful. It was a kind of rewriting and putting a contemporary spin on it, kind of thing. So it was a lot of fun. In fact, I'm sort of doing one at the moment on Welsh castles, and have you heard of Nest, who they called the Helen of Troy, the Welsh Helen of Troy?
No.
She was extraordinary. She ended up at early reign of William the Conqueror, and then his son William becomes her lover. She's kidnapped from I think Carew Castle, and she's famously beautiful. And then he sends her back to marry one of his kind of Norman French lords, and then a Welsh guerrilla prince effectively falls in love with her and kidnaps her, and then he's caught, and she saves her husband from the guerrilla prince by sending him down the garderobe. So she posts him down the loo in the castle, and then the guy's caught by the wronged husband's archers and shot to death, and then she marries again. So she has these extraordinary, astonishing life, and through it all seems to maintain a sense of autonomy and direction, which is almost incomprehensible now for a woman in that position. But Welsh myth is extraordinarily rich, obviously, and our castles are amazing, kind of war machines of oppression. So and full of ghosts, obviously.
Yeah. And at the end of that myth, does the dog die in the end, or is that a happy ending?
The dog generally dies. Although there's one dog. There was Satan, and he was an ape of Barbary called Satan, and he was in hock to a terrible master. I believe at Pembroke and Carew again. And so in my version of the myth, he survives and makes it back to Morocco. But he was set on somebody who came protesting that the ghastly lord had raped his daughter. And so he sets the ape on him, and then the ape kills the bastard as well. I mean, he kills the king as well. And his ghost is said to haunt the castle now.
Like a retelling of Harambe, like an old Harambe sort of story. Steph?
I mean, I was going to say about that ghost of the ape in Carew Castle. You think I remember being in Cardigan in West Wales when I was like 4 years old, and we were down at the farmers market, not where you buy apples, is where you buy animals. And there used to be this woman. They used to have a pet monkey, and it wore a nappy and had a cone of chips. all the time. Loved it. Obviously, then, you know, too dangerous to keep a monkey these days and feed them chips. That's a future myth.
I think Jamie Oliver would have a few things to say about that, wouldn't he? Not feeding that monkey.
You're abusing the monkey diet.
Ruin school meals again. What's the nappy for? The chips.
You know, like regarding being a writer, Horatio, writer is almost one of those sort of dream jobs in many ways. Like you see people within television shows that are writer, and it's always an aspirational type thing that people always want to sort of pass to. We've got any advice if anyone wants to be a writer, or if there's anyone watching or listening who's interested in that sort of field? How best you approach sort of getting into it?
Yes, I think that it's no mystery for a start. You know, when I taught it at John Moores in Liverpool, where a lot of the students had been taken in with quite low grades and quite low expectations, and then you're talking to them about becoming a writer. And I remember the feeling of standing at the bottom of a glass cliff, you know, with me at the bottom and kind of Ian McGeown and Zadie Smith at the top of it. And that's just not the case. It's like anything else. If you want to do it, then you need to do the basics, which is obviously a lot of reading, but also courses are available and they're great on the whole. I think you'd find out quite quickly whether it's for you. My boss at Manchester, a wonderful poet called John McAuliffe, when people want to transfer from undergrad to do the masters with us, he says maybe take a year out and see if you've got the discipline to sit down and do what Steffan was talking about earlier, face the blank page. If that's really what you want to do. And the thing is, I find that sometimes it feels like the best job in the world, of course, but also, unless you're able to just make it up, which very few of us are, it feeds off other things. So, you know, my brother was a dustman briefly, and he's become a filmmaker, among other things. And I was a bartender, and I used to deliver pizza. And without doing those things, you've got nothing to write about. So you want to see everything you do as potentially part of your career. It takes a long time. It can't be rushed. A lot of people want to have written, you know, want to be. I did. I wanted to have a book out before I'd begin this kind of thing. So there's that. But you also might think about, you know, is this satisfying? Is this going to be what feels like a meaningful life? And if the answer is, I've got no choice, it's what I have to do, then you are a writer. It's just a question of plugging away until you get into print.
Yeah, and like you said, it's that sort of repetition experience, and perhaps, you know, it's the doing of it as opposed to the wanting to do it, which I think
you've got to love to do it.
Yeah. Steph, do you want to sort of ask what's next and wrap up?
Yeah, I got one literary question, and then I'll get on to the what next thing. It's a very funny term. I find it hard to sort of to get on board with, but it's an important thing as well. It's a killing your babies. That's a mad term, isn't it, for people who write?
Yeah,
I find it hard to get rid of stuff.
Yeah, so
that's pretty much what it is, isn't it?
Done on the page. I think it's Terrence Black, Kill Your Darlings is the other version of it. And it's so good. It's an absolute zinger. It's a winner. You can't miss. And with you guys writing comedy, you probably know when you get it down that it is a hit, that is a great line. It is a great joke. For prose writers, long form, it's slightly different. It comes from journalism. And the idea was that if you've got a spectacularly ornate and clever and funny and witty and telling phrase, then maybe that's actually rubbish and you should take it out and it's self-indulgent nonsense. I had a sub-editor at my first newspaper on the Mid-Devon Gazette, and he used to lean back on his chair and the whole office would kind of look, and he'd go, Horatio, he'd been to Eton, and you go, yes, and you go, what is this self-indulgent twaddle? And he'd be like, that's my best line, Pete. He'd be like, so yeah, there's a degree of that, and editors, thing is, do you guys get somebody to look over your stuff, or you just try it out on an audience, presumably, and find out the hard way?
Yeah, live audience is the way to do it, but then it comes with the pressure of, when you said about the killing your darlings and the letting go of good material, to give a joke a good area, you need a big audience or a proper audience, and then when it's a good audience, maybe I shouldn't do the new joke, maybe I should do the joke I know is going to work. And is that constant, I find for me, constant sort of mental battle of, you've got to try new stuff, but you've got to do a good job. And it is a balance in that. But I think this lockdown period has been a good chance to get rid of, swipe the slate clean, and maybe come back sort of, bigger, better, and stronger. That's the idea anyway. So have you found lockdown liberating in that sense for writing?
It's great for work, it's taking away the pressure of time, the feeling that everybody else is running forward and that you're standing still, which happens a lot in writing, as you know. And the feeling that doesn't matter anymore has been fantastic. So a great lifting of false consciousness, the idea that if you're not getting up in the morning and doing 2,000 words and then going for a run, that you're wasting your time. I've just let it all go, stuff all that. So it's been good for that very much. But I think I hope we're going to see a huge flowering of the arts after this period, because we all had time to just maybe do nothing. Maybe that's what we needed. The onward rush, it's so interesting, isn't it? This idea of essential and non-essential. And it turns out that most of our lives were totally non-essential. So I hope to live slightly differently, spend more time with people I mind about and less time with people I don't, and do the things that matter and do them now, or when it's safe to do so. Yeah,
definitely. Steph?
Excellent. I've really enjoyed talking to you. You've got a great voice I can listen to all day. The question is now, what's next? What's the next journey? What's the next adventure? What's the next book, Horatio?
So that's another thing I've learned the hard way, is that you can't force it. You just have to wait for them to find you sometimes. So I've got a book coming out in March, which I'm just editing now, which is about the breakdown. And then I've got to finish off my third children's book, Aubrey and the Terrible Spiders, needs to be done for Firefly. And then, I don't know, my father died last year, and I'd like to write about him. He makes a very good subject for a story. He was thrown out of South Africa in 1963 for being part of a group or associated with a group that blew up pylons and attempted to confront the apartheid regime through non-lethal violence. And then he comes to Britain, and he didn't have an easy life, Dad. He's a classic, why you should go to therapy. He had 4 marriages, and he kind of read himself into fullness. By the time he'd finished work and left journalism, he retired on the stroke of 65. He was approaching, he became a wonderful man, and it was always there. And I think by hard thinking and listening and reading, he did what maybe a good therapist might achieve in a couple of years. But he was marvelous. Obviously, I loved him, and I want to write about him and about my son, because it's very interesting seeing the lines that connect them. Despite the fact that they only met a few times. So maybe something like that. I'd like to write a book of joy, actually, is what I'd like to do. I'm done with the blues.
That sounds great. Sounds great. And of all days to do it as well, on Father's Day, we've got this podcast as well. So it must mean something there. So have they treated you to a Father's Day card and possibly a pair of garish socks?
Have they, bugger? They informed me that they had ordered me a shirt online that my son Aubrey chose very carefully to match one of his. I was like, tell me it's not a SWAT top. And then since then, it hasn't arrived, and they've entirely forgotten that it's Father's Day, so nobody's even said it yet. That's the job.
Say it loud and hear you.
Yeah.
The plight of the neglected lockdown dad.
That's it. That
sounds like a children's book as well. I don't know. So, if anyone wants to sort of get in touch or keep up with what you're doing, Horatio, where can people sort of find you in that sense?
Well, I'm still telling it out on Radio 4 every now and then. I work for my own correspondent. I do bits and pieces for the papers, mostly the FT, but then we've been on pause for travel for a while. So the next thing will be March the 4th, I guess, when the next book comes out, and hopefully by then we'll all be able to, go back and get out and do what we want to do. Because a large part of my life has been talking to people, to readers, and curious audiences in tents, and all that's been gone. And I've actually missed it. I've really missed meeting people. So that would be good, wouldn't it?
Well,
you must intensely.
Yeah, doing this is nice, you know, and it's been a pleasure having you on. But it wouldn't compare to getting together in person and doing it. Do you know what I mean? It does miss that little extra something, I think, and I am looking forward to that myself. That bit of human interaction and eye contact and all the things we sort of take for granted. You know, Horatio, it's been an absolute pleasure, mate. Good luck with the new book. Good luck with managing a 7-year-old and perhaps avoid him ending up as a police officer in time, and everything else you got on the fires.
Thank you so much for having me, and good luck with all of your work. I can't wait to come and see you guys in action when that's possible.
Yes, as soon as we're allowed to leave the house again, we'll hook something up, I'm sure.
Wait, you've got plenty of time.
Yeah, no pressure. Take care, and see you before too long, I hope.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Horatio.
Thank you.
Cheers.